There she blows. There it is.
Roll 'em.
We're ready, Jared. We're ready for all the dancing and the prancing and the whole deal.
Jared's the guy that does all of that, folks. He puts up all of the sound effects, any of the bulls kicking bears' butts, because that's what's been happening a lot lately. And just happened again. There's another dancing robot. And Pete and I are happy to welcome you to the Rebel's Edge. I'm shooting here at the NASDAQ because I was interviewing a guy, Pete, you'd love this. There's a company called 22nd Century. The stock symbol is XXII. And the reason I bring it up is they are a biotechnology company that deals with plants. And the plants that they primarily deal with, Pete, are tobacco and cannabis. And before you get off on any wild Snoop Dogg stuff,
F to the G.
What they do is, through biotechnology and then, of course, patents that they have, they've been able to reduce the nicotine level for tobacco and or anything that burns, cannabis, hemp, things like that, dramatically. So on their packaging, Pete, the FDA actually has them say, this is not by choice, but the FDA actually reaches out and says, we need you to say this product causes you to smoke less. Because, and it's not just, like a patch is a different delivery mechanism. This isn't a patch or gum. This is, you're smoking a cigarette. They don't brand the cigarettes. They sell them to the brands. But because of what's in it, it doesn't have nearly the nicotine. So basically you're weaning yourself off of nicotine addiction, which is pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
I mean,
that is interesting.
Check it out. They just got another, Pete, they got them already in Circle K and 7-Eleven, and they just signed a deal today. That's why I was interviewing them. That's all public knowledge, folks. I'm not giving you something you didn't hear. That press release went out today. But pretty amazing stuff, Pete. XXII. Just keep it on your watch list. All right. We appreciate all of you being here, folks. I am John Najarian. He's Pete Najarian. And, of course, we have Jared handling all those sound effects and dancing koalas or whatever. God. Let's talk a little bit, Pete, about the CPI, because in the macro minute, CPI rose just 0.2% over the last month and 3% over June of last year. Still more than the 2% that they want it to be at. But this was viewed pretty positively that if the Fed is indeed data dependent, Pete, maybe they will start slowing down or stay at a pause for these rate hikes.
Nope. Here's what's going to happen.
Nope.
They've got a target of 2%. They're seeing 3%. And they're like, hey, we got to drop a full 1% before we get to there. So what the hell? We're going to cut, or we're going to raise rates one more time. And, it's interesting, John, but I actually do believe that. They've been very adamant about that. He talked about rate hikes with the S at the end. I thought that was pretty interesting. The other thing that's actually moving markets, though, despite the fact that, or not despite, but after the CPI, how about that 10-year? The 10-year was floating above 4 for a while, and that is that mechanism where people just seem to sell. Well, as soon as we got under 10, stock market started taking off. We had a great day Monday, great day Tuesday, great day Thursday or Wednesday. So it's pretty impressive to see how we're moving around right now. And actually, last I looked, the 10-year was actually under 3.9. So, it's not only dropped underneath that 4 level, it's even got a little bit further. Not saying it's going to go all the way back down to some ridiculous level, but 4 is the trigger, and it's under 4.
Yeah, 385, like Pete said, folks. That's pretty dramatic because it was 409. That's 4.09, folks, just 2 days ago. Yeah. So this is a pretty big drop. And somebody thinks, Pete, that even if the Fed moves, rates aren't going higher. We'll see if they're right. All right. let's do fantastic future.
Fantastic futures.
It's somewhere.
Yeah, blame Jared for that one, folks. If your husband, wife, significant other says, "What the hell was that?" If you've got the sound up loud. But that was Jared. So fantastic futures today, Pete. Lean hogs, because lean hogs are up 35% in the past month, 90 days. That's amazing. And inflation's cooling off, right? But hogs are up 35%. That's bacon.
I like fat hogs. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, the lean hogs, it's an interesting story. I'm going to go with this, though, John, for today, copper. And here's why I find it interesting. You could look at it this way and say, the thing hasn't done a damn thing all year. It started the year 385. You know where we are today? 385. But in between that, we have seen some ups, some downs, some decent volatility within there. The highs were towards the latter part of January. We got up there at 4.25. The lows were in May. We got around 356. So it is moving around a lot. And I can tell you this, I think second half is going to be a half where we're going to see a few others actually start to take the reins and be a part of the rally to the upside. And I think materials is probably a big part of that. And when we talk about EV and we get into certain other things, we do talk a heck of a lot about copper. We talk about copper and lithium and all the rest. I'm just getting more and more bullish on the idea that this thing has a little bit of room to the upside at this point, John.
Well, we shall see, Pete.
Yeah.
We shall see. I'd certainly be in the camp with you that since copper has lagged and the NASDAQ is just booming, sooner or later, somebody's going to say, well, what isn't booming that I can buy and feel good about owning? And it might be a non-precious metal like copper, certainly an industrial metal. All right, Pete, UPS strike. I'll make a statement, then I'll ask you if it's going to happen. The last time the UPS workers went on strike was 1997. At that time, FedEx and the post office picked up the slack. I don't know if they can do it again, Pete. I mean, if UPS goes on strike, that is a huge negative, even though, of course, back in 97, Amazon didn't have Prime, and it certainly didn't have a bunch of Prime jets and warehouses that were delivering stuff like they do now. But nonetheless, Amazon and a lot of their sellers still rely pretty heavily on UPS as one of their delivery mechanisms.
Absolutely, they do. I think the U.S. Post Office, I think there's a lot of people that seem to be reliant on UPS and what they do. And I think this is a bigger storyline that no one's really paying attention to it, John. I don't think. I mean, you're bringing it up today. I think it's great because we should be talking about this. This could be an issue. They got through the pandemic. They got that huge surge, right? And then all of a sudden, as we've come out of that pandemic, now all of a sudden you're seeing it really sort of wafer off a little bit. We're not seeing the same kinds of demands, nothing close to the kinds of demands that we were getting before. So with 340,000 workers at UPS, and if these guys are going to have an issue, that's a pretty big issue, not just for UPS. That's a big issue for the rest of the country, in my opinion. So I'd side with what you're talking about, John. I mean, this is a little bit of a different environment than it was before back in the 90s. And it's going to be a problem. I would almost expect to see the government try to step in and see if they can try to figure out some way to negotiate with these guys. I think it's that big of a deal, to be honest with you.
Well, I think it's even bigger than the railroad strike, Pete. And the railroad strike, of course, is not the last mile, but it certainly is distribution of product across the country. Yeah. And the president himself had to step in this last time, I think, Pete, to negotiate some stuff. So I think you're spot on. Let's talk about RXRX, which is Recursion Pharmaceuticals. And Pete, I just shook my head when I looked at this and I saw it was up 28% in the pre-market. Then I saw 40, then I saw 50, then I saw 60. Now it's up over 74%. And here's why. They are working, collaborating, if you will, with NVIDIA. And they're going to accelerate foundation models for AI-enabled drug discoveries. That's pretty damn big. Now, I know everything, you throw AI at the beginning or end of it, and it's going to get some notice. But this 74%, yeah, that's a real huge surge that I think could be justified.
Yeah, and I can't remember seeing a stock do this in a long time, John. I know in the past we've seen stocks do crazy things, but this is a pretty unbelievable move to the upside, no doubt about that. And when you, like you said, you use the letters AI, and suddenly people pay attention, and you've got the investment coming from Nvidia, 50 million bucks, throwing into this whole thing as well. Sort of a little bit of a little greeting. It's in a private offering, is what they did. So this is a wild one, John, especially with, how about this? What if I told you this? They trade on average about 2 million shares a day. About an hour and a half into the day, they traded over 40 million. Now they're about 58 million shares have changed hands. I mean, this thing is really active. And to your point, a lot of the time we'll see something like we did earlier with some of the other stocks. You'll see a stock jump up, kind of ease back a little bit. It just seems like they need to take a bit of a breather. This thing's just going up, 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 up. It's just an amazing move to the upside. Strong. It was up 50%, 60%, 66%. What did you say? 74% right now? I mean, this is really something that it's gaining momentum to the upside as we speak.
Yeah. And when you look at the normal turnover, Pete, which you and I talk about all the time, when we look at unusual activity, we're looking for abnormal. Abby, someone. We're looking for abnormal. And you want abnormal, you got it. This is really abnormal. Recursion Pharmaceuticals. I mean, my God, Pete, in the first 10 minutes of trading today, this thing was absolutely en fuego. And let me see what the latest numbers are here. Well, it might not come up before. Yeah, here it is. How's this for a number, Pete? 59 million shares. 2 million shares is normal.
Real.
All right. Let's dive in, Pete, to another stock, Lucid. We had unusual put activity, but it isn't a bell ringer yet. It might be. You guys remember when Pete and I broke the news about Lucid doing that deal with Aston Martin, because Aston Martin had no EVs, no exposure, and yet everybody, including Ferrari, has EVs. So they needed a partner to do that. They found Lucid. The stock went from 550 the end of June, Pete, 550 to 840. Now it's fallen apart because they only delivered 2,100 vehicles, and they kept telling us they were going to deliver 10,000. Again, 2,100, folks. Elon Musk and Tesla, they do that a day. So what's going on here, Pete?
Unbelievable. To your point, John, I mean, I think it all goes right back to there. Aston Martin, the whole thing, that part made some sense, right? That's why it got the spike that it got. In just the last week, it's gone from $7 to 830 or 840, and it's almost returned all the way back in the last week, John, just a complete round turn. This is a problem, and those deliveries, the fact that they're missing on this low of a number for deliveries is pretty unbelievable. I mean, production, deliveries, all of that. You've got production, 2,100. They delivered 1,400. I mean, they are not really here to play. They're here to watch and have a good time and maybe get off to the side and do whatever. But are you kidding me? I mean, people want to give Musk flack, and they gave him flack, John, years ago with some of his numbers. I don't remember his numbers looking anything like this at the stage that Lucid is right now. I would think that should be a multiple of at least 10 for now, and it's not even close to that. So understandable why we're seeing some of the selling going on today.
And those puts that we had, Pete, for unusual activity still are blowing up, but they weren't as big as we like to talk about them when they're 100%, 200%. They're not there yet, but they're headed that way. It's 96 million share turnover, and obviously an awful lot of people selling pretty hard. Yeah. All right, let's talk about Silk. Speaking of selling hard, because JP Morgan downgraded the stock from overweight to neutral based on whether or not Medicare was going to pay for procedures from this medical device maker, Pete. Shares were down double digits, and that's not the half of it.
Yeah, stock's on its 52-week lows, John. Last I looked, at least, it was 23.40, and it was sitting right there. It might be even a little bit lower now, but the high is 58. So it's a long ways from Tipperillo at this point in time. And these guys, they're doing a lot of things for, doing the best that they can out of what they're doing. But this kind of came out of left field. So JP Morgan not only did what they did by downgrading it, John, how about the fact that they had a $50 tag on it for their price target? Now they dropped it down to 28. Now that's a pretty significant move. So you can understand why the stock got below 28. It's now under 20, well, around 23, but this is not a great story for somebody who's out there scrambling, trying to do their best, and all of a sudden you get hit with this. That's why the stock is just taking it on the chin today, and just an unbelievable sell-off today.
Yeah, very harsh sell-off, and the fact that JP Morgan, who swings obviously a very big stick, 7.2 million share turnover, Pete. Normal's 550,000 shares. So we're talking, almost 13 times normal volume so far. There's a lot of people giving up on this one today, as you say, hitting a new 52-week low. Yeah. All right. What do you got, Pete, for us as far as some sports?
Yeah, well, we got a little bit of Major League Baseball, and why not? We got to the halfway point, right? We just got done with the All-Star game, and somebody got hurt, unfortunately, with trying to do the home run derby. Of course, that's never good, because that's part of the reason why these All-Star games are so pathetic is, they've gotten to the point where there's not much competition. Although the game was relatively close, that was kind of interesting, I guess. But, it's never really been about the competition all that much. And guys just seem like they're out there having a good time. And it's fun for fans to see everybody. Home run derby, same thing. But all of a sudden, when you do get an injury, now you understand why these things don't really work all that well, especially mid-season. So that's, I think, part of the problem. But I thought we'd look at Major League Baseball from this perspective, John. Who is the one team that you're looking at right now? And there's a couple, I think, that you could say, well, Tampa, Atlanta, maybe it's Texas. I'm going to go with Texas in terms of who is the best chance you could lock up right now and say, you know what, these guys are most likely in the World Series. And from my perspective, I think most likely to win the World Series. As of right now, they look that good. They're doing it with their bats. They're doing it with the pitching. When you look at the run differential and all that type of thing. But what do you think of those three? I'd say that's probably your three as well, but I'm going to go with Texas. But you might say Tampa. You might actually say Atlanta, because Atlanta's on fire, John.
That is who I was going to say, Pete. Atlanta at the break, 60-29. I mean, that's a phenomenal win-loss percentage there. I think that's your team to watch, Pete. If I had to pick a sleeper, which was somewhat of what you asked me to pick earlier, and by the way, Atlanta at 60-29 is 2 wins ahead of Tampa, Pete.
Yep.
I would say Cincinnati because of Ellie. They're starting to get their pitching coming around. They've won 50. They're 50-41, which is pretty darn good. So I would say if you're looking for one that's going to be a surprise to some people, Cincy, because they're ahead of the Milwaukee Brewers, Chicago Cubs, Pittsburgh Pirates, St. Louis in the Central. And I know Milwaukee's just 1 game back, but I mean, this guy, Ellie, Pete, is just a phenom. And when a team gets behind a player that's having a year like he's having, I think that can drive you all the way to the playoffs. Now, maybe they don't go deep. I would pick Atlanta to go deep, but I think these guys could surprise a lot of people and probably pay off pretty big for some of the bettors out there.
Yeah, I think those locks are the locks. I really do. I think those are the three. They've done it all year already, this first half of the year at least, and they've been on there. From a sleeper perspective, though, John, I like a couple of these teams that probably nobody's ever even thought of at this point, but I'm going to go with Baltimore and maybe even the San Francisco Giants, because it's just amazing what both these two teams are doing when you look at the payroll of Baltimore and you just sit there scratching your head, just like you do with Tampa, just like you do with a couple others, but they're playing at an incredibly high level, and they've done it now for the first half of the season. They continue on this path, start to catch a little bit more of a mojo. You just never know how that whole thing really could play out. So I like those. I think there's a great chance. And if I had to pick one of the two, I'd probably go with Baltimore. They just seem to have a lot going in the right direction for them to maybe make a run. I don't think they can win the World Series. I'm not even sure they make it, but I think they get into the playoffs, and I think they can go a little bit deeper before they get pushed out. And this is, again, a team that's got a payroll down in that bottom 3 or 4 of all Major League Baseball. All right, John, the second thing we're going to do is how about a little bit of football? Why not? Big 12. Now, when you and I talk about Big 12 football, what do we think of? Well, you originally go to Texas, you look at Oklahoma, right? I mean, that's where it sort of begins and ends. Not anymore. It's Kansas State. And I don't know how many people have really paid attention to what's going on, because Texas, Oklahoma, where are they going? They're going to the SEC at the end of the year. They're going to be gone out of the Big 12. And meanwhile, maybe they're running scared, John, of Kansas State, because if you look at it, since they became the Big 12, 1996, Texas, you know how many wins they've got as the champion of that group? 3. You know how many Kansas State's got? 3. So everybody looks past these guys. They've got a great coach from North Dakota State who came down there, and all he's done is sit. He's in the top 5 winningest coaches in college football right now. I mean, at the FBS level. So he's doing a lot of things right. They got 15 starters coming back for a team that won 10 games last year. They won and beat TCU, which everybody forgets about. And then they ended up losing to Alabama. So they've gotten a taste, but they got 15 starters coming back. I think Kansas State is one of these sleepers, John, that could be really, really interesting to watch this year in college football, because nobody talks about them. Nobody wants to give them any credit. And meanwhile, they got 5 guys on the offensive line, all coming back, actually 6. And so they're going to be able to protect the quarterback and give him all the time, or the running backs a lot of room to run the football. I think this is a pretty interesting football team that might be scaring people even starting right now.
Well, Pete, I remember last year when you and I were talking about it. By the way, this is episode 191 today.
Wow.
Of the Rebels Edge.
Yeah.
But I remember when we were just starting off a year ago, and we were talking about Kansas State and how they had these so-called road graders, these big monster O-linemen. And other teams have big O-linemen, but these guys work as a unit pretty damn well. And the running backs just get through those little gaps that these guys create. And sometimes they're gaping holes, not just little gaps where the guy has to scoot through and do the Shaquan Barkley. They're just, like they could walk through these holes. So I think that's really when we're talking about K-State, we're talking about big physical football players. And I love to see that. I would hate to play against it, but I love watching it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Chris Kleiman, the coach there, John, is just an amazing story. A kid out of Iowa. By the way, his name is getting floated around for the Northwestern job. Now, here's a thing that I would actually
You don't want to leave K-State for Northwestern, do you?
Well, I don't understand where in the hell these people are coming from that are saying that, because it's like, so what does he gain by going to Northwestern? I just don't really see it. Okay, Big Ten. I get that, right? I get it. Big Ten's pretty big. You got SEC, Big Ten. They're probably the big 2. But the Big 12 is still there. They're phenomenal. They did a great job. Shoot, they've been putting, teams into that final group, at the end of the year pretty consistently. I don't think he needs to go anywhere. I don't think he wants to go anywhere. I think he's just another great somebody who represents North Dakota State, like the guy at Wyoming, like what he's doing there, like other guys are doing at other universities. They have just an absolute machine that they've built up there at North Dakota State, where when those coaches are primed, I mean, this guy's won, John, I think he's got 4 FBS titles. So he's done pretty well as a coach in football. I mean, national title's not so bad. I don't think there's a lot of guys who can say that on their resume these days. So I think he's going to be where he wants to be. And why wouldn't he want to stay at Kansas State?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a situation where, especially with the difficulties recruiting at Northwestern. Now, we all know that they've got rigorous academics at several of the Big Ten schools, not just Northwestern, but that's I think a step above, Pete, in terms of getting kids that can pass muster in school as well as be, game changers on the football field. So I would be, loath to leave a place like K-State or North Dakota for a job like Northwestern. That's a challenge, and Fitz was up to it, and unfortunately he got run out of there. But I would not make that move if I were the coach at North Dakota State or at K-State.
Right. I agree with you. Yep.
Well, thank you for joining us, folks. Again, that stock, since I've got a couple texts from you guys that I talked about top of the show, that is 22nd Century, symbol XXII. Read the press release. Tell me what you think. I like the stock, and I have bought some during the show here. I'm not saying that to pump it up. I think this is a long-term good play because if you can get into some health-related issues on the positive side, instead of just sort of dealing with it mealy-mouthed with a patch or gum, I think it's a game changer. So anyway, you guys have a great day. We will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you then.